A very pleasant good day to all of our viewers. Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk. Let's Talk is a program sponsored by the South Leeward Conference of Seventh Adventists. And on this program, we discuss issues impacting church members and the wider society. We have been for the last 3 weeks, in fact, I think, discussing the issue relating to masking abuse and hurt and infidelity behind the cloak of the church. We got into the discussion of child abuse last week, and we had quite an interesting discussion. Pastor Adams, our Family Ministries Director, was with us. He's back with us today. Welcome, Pastor Adams.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. It is always my pleasure to share these very valuable information. And this is just a very critical area that we have to not just start a discussion on, but finish it, to be sure that we give to our viewers, our membership, those who belong to the household of faith, cross-denomination, how important it is for us to talk to this issue. It is a real issue that is not just isolated, but it is global. And therefore, we must have this conversation. As difficult and as painful as it is, we have to talk to this.
Certainly. Yes. And last week initially when I decided to discuss this subject on Let's Talk, my initial intentions were that we would take 3 weeks and finish it. The final week, which was last week, was supposed to deal with the issue of child abuse. But it occurred to me quite clearly that 1 week was not enough. In fact, I'm beginning to think, Pastor Adams, that we will not get through all that I would like us to talk about this afternoon, but we're going to do our best to see how much. It's important for our viewers to understand that we can't say everything in 1 hour, but we are providing exposure. This is an opportunity to bring issues to the fore. For those of you who are in positions of leadership, some of these you can take up with your local family ministries, leaders in your congregations, AY meetings with young people, etc., children's ministries, women's ministries. And these are areas that you can further explore in your respective congregations.
Yes.
Well, before we go any further, let's have a word of prayer. Almighty Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity to again have another Let's Talk session where we can discuss important issues impacting the church and the wider community. We are today bringing to a conclusion this important discussion. We ask for your wisdom and your guidance in Jesus' name. Amen. Last week, Pastor, I ended the program by stating that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is very concerned about children and about the care of children. And in this area of sexual abuse, we are careful to have a few statements, policy documents that clearly outline our position, our perspective. I read the introductory element of our statement on child nurture and care, and I want to read that again because there are some important elements there that I want us to explore even before we go into some other elements of child abuse. So it says, Seventh-day Adventists place a high value on children. In the light of the Bible, they're seen as children are seen as precious gifts from God, entrusted to the care of parents, family, community of faith, and society at large. Children possess enormous potential for making positive contributions to the church and to society. Attention to their care, protection, and development is extremely important. Now, this is but the introduction of the statement called Nurture and Protection of Children. We do have a separate policy on child abuse. And I don't know that we're ever going to get time to get to that one. We probably make references to it. But before that, what are the implications of what we have just read here? Children, the church places a high value on children. Implications of the statement saying that children are a precious gift from God, entrusted to the care of parents, family, community of faith, society at large. and that they possess potential for making positive contributions to the church and to society. What's the implication of all of this? And of course, that final line, that attention to their care and protection and development is extremely important.
And so that is so crucial because in the context of the church, it is so important that we have a direct ministry for children. And I don't know for the other denominations, I guess it's the same thing across all Christendom, because we are here today and we are gone tomorrow. So when we are dealing with our children, we're not dealing with them for here and now, but we are also dealing, the posterity or religious heritage and legacy is passed on to them. And we cannot have damaged, dysfunctional individuals who we are going to pass on our heritage and legacy to. We have, remember I said, I think it's some weeks ago when we were talking, we said that people must serve the church from a saved position. And the intent of all of this is to save our children, you know. And the Bible beautifully puts it out to see how it, if it was not even an abusive situation, these mothers were bringing their children so that the Christ himself would bless them, and the disciples were protecting them, preventing them. And Christ said, what did he say? Let the children come to me, so that they are valuable in the sight of God. They are valuable members of the household of faith. And so we must develop them, and we must recognize that you know, there are needs of these children. As a church community, it is not just spiritual needs alone. The child has social needs, the child has psychological needs, the child has emotional needs, the child has physical needs, all of this. So in the church, in our ministry, what we do, I just love the Seventh Adventist Church. The program that we have is to develop the child, the whole child. So when they go to the camps, they do a lot of stuff there. It's not just the spiritual component, we have the social component, right? We have the physical component. They go on hikes, they play games, they have the banquet situation. That's the social graces they're developing, you know. So we have everything in place to help them to develop as whole, rounded individuals. And anything that is going to stymie the growth and the development of a child holistic. So the success of our children, as Dr. Johnson puts it, has to do with the school, the church, and the home. All of them working together in tandem. But if these children are affected in any one of these other two, and are also affected in the church, so if the child experiences abuse at home, abuse at school, abuse in the church, what kind of individual we are producing, what kind of individual we are passing on to society? We are passing on to society a damaged, dysfunctional person, a hurting person who is bleeding. And when you are a dysfunctional, hurting person, you are also going to bleed on other people that probably has nothing to do with your circumstances, because hurting people hurt others, and that's what it is. So that these, and in our previous talk we said, remember that, and I gave you the example of how this adult was hurting. It's alleged that this child was abused, and then he became an adult to the point where he's so angry and enraged that he's gonna literally take the life of the perpetrator, killed him in a hotel room.
Very, very serious.
Yes.
You know, last week, not last week, 2 weeks ago, I did say, the longer I live, the more I appreciate and value the Seventh Adventist Church, because our ministry is holistic. You know, so we're talking about child abuse. We're talking about masking child abuse behind the church. You know, so look now, it's important for us to say that child abuse is more than sexual. You know, that question that I just asked you, Pastor, we can spend the rest of the afternoon on it.
Yes.
But we have to move on. So let me make the point here.
Okay.
That child abuse is more than sexual.
Yes.
We will have a lot to say about sexual abuse issues, but we don't want to overlook the other important areas of abuse. the statement, I'm talking about our position statement on nurturing and protection of children. So the statement speaks to the matter of redemptive correction. Last week, you mentioned some of the inappropriate ways of discipline in the home that can impact children and make them more susceptible to abuse later on in life. It's interesting that the statement says, and I'm quoting, the Seventh-day Adventist Church places a priority on church-based parent education that helps parents develop the skills necessary for a redemptive approach to correction. Many children experience harsh punishment in the name of a biblical approach to discipline. Correction characterized by severe, punitive, and dictatorial control often leads to resentment and rebellion. Such harsh discipline is also associated with heightened risk for physical and psychological harm to children, as well as an increased likelihood the youth will resort to coercion and violence in resolving their differences with others. By contrast, examples from Scripture, as well as a large body of research, confirm the effectiveness of more gentle forms of discipline that allow children to learn through reasoning and experiencing the consequences of their choices. Such wider measures have been demonstrated to increase the likelihood children will make lifelong, life-affirming choices and espouse parental values as they mature. How important is that? It's a lot, but how important is this?
So I hear the constant debate as to what constitutes the disciplining of a child. But what Scripture is actually talking about is the discipling of the child. And we see that from the Old Testament concept coming right over. Because when we do parenting education, and quite a lot you mentioned there, so if we get the parenting education and guidance right, we will not have the debate that I hear, because I was presenting, I think it's a family week somewhere, and I hear the older traditional members saying, are we talking, no corporal punishment, no physical punishment for these children. You're all saying these days, but look, we grew up and our parents did this and this to us. They beat us, they did us, the whole kind of thing. Physical punishment, right? What they call corporal punishment. But I was sitting in my class, and I think the professor says, punishment is different from discipline.
Correct.
Punishment is what you get when you receive a crime, when you commit a crime. Disciplining or discipling must be correct, and correct, it must affect behavior. Because you can, and I've seen that all the time, because the same children who they say that, okay, hit them, they say that the blows, they burn and they cool, and the child goes back to do the same thing. And in the statement that you read, spoke about reasoning. So, there is age-appropriate discipline or discipling. So there are three very important lessons that a child must learn. A child must learn trust, a child must learn love, a child must learn obedience. Where do we get that from? Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. These things teach unto your children diligently. It didn't say adult. Teach unto your children diligently, and that is obedience. Because if we teach our children to obey the natural way, then up the road we will not have rebellion. But if we have not done our work as parents, then we will have to resort to these forms of discipline that they're arguing about. Because a child who is taught to obey and obedience becomes a responsible child. And a responsible child becomes a responsible adult. Right? So we hear all of this debate about, but children are people too. So they appeal to the child's reasoning. They must learn to obey based on reason. So we must give them a reason for obedience. And that is done in terms of the age appropriateness of the child. Right? So if we want, and that's what I'm saying, that parenting education is so important, but a lot of times when we are giving this kind of information, those who need it most,
they're not there,
are absent, they're not there, because children operate at that concrete level. And when we look at the stage theory of children, how they operate, you cannot give them abstract information. So if you take a toddler, 2-3-year-old, and give them a lecture as to why they should not move this rock or do this or that they can't relate to that. You have to give them concrete, objective, and that is why when anybody who's in early childhood education will see, why do you think they have all of those objectives around the classroom? Because that's how children learn. If you want for them to get the point across, and I have a sister who's a consummate teacher, and she's been teaching, all levels, but she said to me that what you want the child to get, that object must be so overwhelming that they can't miss it. So if I want to teach a child concreteness, in the concrete terms, orderliness, and so, I have to bring the child to the point. You take your shoes off and you put it here in this manner. They have to see me do this. That's how they get it. So we learn them the principle of obeying, and obeying the right way. So they see it. And then I am demonstrating. So these values...
But here's the problem, and we can't spend much more time on this, but here I suspect is the issue. Some parents are so broken that they cannot pass on that kind of value.
I was coming to that, because we parent using the method by which we were parented. And if we were not exposed to any method, notice that I'm trying to remember, I think it is Kevin, no, if it's not Stephen Covey, it has to be Kevin Lehman, and the profound statement, when we parent our children, we are parenting our grandchildren at the same time, because patterns tend to persist.
Correct.
So if we came from that corporal punishment, punitive discipline, and if that's all we know, that's the only model we saw, then that's the way we would parent. Except we have
there is something else I'm bringing to the equation, Pastor.
Yes.
Because, the other day I was in a supermarket, and I was so disturbed by this parent and this child. The child is perhaps attracted to a candy or something to that effect. And the mother said, you can't have it. And the child threw a tantrum and screamed and cried. And the mother said, okay, go ahead and take it. And I was disturbed. A little righteous indignation stirred up inside of me. And I felt so sorry for that parent. Because, and then I began to think that, this was a young person. I said, poor child. Maybe she herself was not properly parented.
Yes.
And then when you have a situation where an individual like this who may have been molested in their childhood and dealing with these significant traumas in their past, and it complicates the whole matter.
And the whole signature already is so loaded, because we cannot approach parenting, and as you mentioned that was a young person, you cannot approach parenting that we can get a baby or a child once you reach the age of puberance and all of the biological factors are in place, you can become pregnant.
Yes, but not...
That you can become pregnant doesn't mean that you are qualified to be a parent.
Correct.
Because parenting is not a trial and error method or approach. You have to know your role as a parent, and you have to understand all these things. But I was going to make the point here, when you mentioned that, you see, that was the wrong thing, because when we're dealing with children, we have what is called the RR and the WW key. When the behavior is right, you reward it. When the behavior is wrong, you withhold.
Correct.
So if the child is behaving in that kind of a way, throwing tantrum, and you reward that behavior, then you are perpetrating that behavior,
And
because the child thinks that he's going to behave that way because that's the way that he gets what he or she wants.
Notwithstanding, Pastor, we have to move on. So I do want to, because we have a lot we want to cover. We're talking about masking child abuse behind the cloak of the church. So let's look at the issue of making church a safe place for children. Because I started reading our position statement on the nurture and protection of children. So the matter of making church a safe place for children, the statement says, the church also takes seriously its responsibility to minimize the risk for child sexual abuse and violence against children in the congregational setting. Last week you mentioned about the statistics with respect to how many child abuse cases take place on site as opposed to off site. Let me continue. First and foremost, church leaders and members must themselves live by a strict code of ethics that precludes even the appearance of evil as regards the exploitation of minors for the gratification of adult desires. Now, I believe this is the code of ethics. I shared last week my encounter with a gentleman after church, and he objected to signing a code of ethics because he, as a criteria for him working with children. Now, why is it so important that we require those working with children to sign the code of ethics? Look at what this statement says. We take seriously our responsibility. And I like the section that says that first and foremost, church leaders and members must themselves live by a strict code of ethics that precludes even the appearance of evil.
And I am glad that you're reading this. And now that you talk about that position, I am saying to our viewers, particularly Seventh Adventists and other persons who are listening from other denominations, if your denomination doesn't have this, you can borrow from us, because it's all long and curve. If you go on to Family Ministries, General Conference, familyministries.org, you are going to see a set of statements, position statements about about all of those things that we have mentioned here. The child, all of our child protection policies, statement, what it means. Now, so when we are acting in the high position, notice that what we are saying as a denomination now, no person should be with a child alone in any enclosed place. We have room for the bathrooms. All of those are involved. Act with a sense of integrity. So it is helping you to be detached. So if, let's say, remember I said the last time we were on, we spoke about the interaction of those in position and authority with our children, be it what denomination, it could be weekly, monthly, whatever. So no child is supposed to go to the bathroom with an adult alone. They must be accompanied by another adult. All of these things. So it's not only in paper, but we want the leaders to act with integrity by practicing this, that it becomes transparent, that people are seeing this happening, right? So if you have counselors, I'm specifically referring to our church now, if you have counselors and you're at a camp setting, the male counselor should not be dealing with our female counselors. The female counselor should be dealing with our male counselors. We are talking about being forthright and intentional about implementing what we have on paper, that you are seeing that I am acting with integrity. Not because I'm the leader in authority and control. I am going to go against the rule, and I'm going to insist that I must go to the bathroom with this young boy alone. No, that's not what the policy says. It says that you as an adult should not alone accompany a child to the bathroom.
You know, Jeremiah says that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. And it is important for us to recognize, because I hear some persons, I'm imagining rather, some persons arguing that, you know, enforcing the signing of a code of ethics is a demonstration of lack of trust in some persons. And we're saying, listen, the children, the welfare of our children is so important that if you can't commit yourself to declaring that I'm going to live by this code of ethics, then you're not qualified to deal with the children.
No, and we should, there's no if and but. If somebody is resisting this, then they can't be dealing with our children. That's the bottom line. There's no question about it. Because you see, abuse doesn't have a face, doesn't wear a face. And it spawns all spectrum of society. The religious, socioeconomic. In fact, I would shock you by saying, Doctor, I don't know if I'm going to shock you by saying this or shock our viewers, that abuse is highest. Let me say it again. Abuse is highest in the Christian community because of these reasons. And it's just allowed, where you think that abuse should be the least, the research literature is showing us that abuse is highest in the Christian community, cross-denominational study, when we put the statistics together. In fact, I saw a research in Germany, but you quoted sometime we were on some previous program, as far as 9,000 victims responded that they were molested, and this is 1 in 4 boys.
I want to go back to your statement. You kind of rushed past it. Abuse has no face. And I'm now quoting, as you mentioned that, I said, let me just quote this from our statement on child sexual abuse. And it says, sexual abusers may be men or women, and may be of any age, nationality, or socioeconomic background. They are often men who are married with children, have respectable jobs, and may be regular churchgoers. It is common for offenders to strongly deny their abusive behavior, to refuse to see their actions as a problem, and to rationalize their behavior, or place blame or something else on them. So the idea that we're talking about respectable individuals, we're talking about people who you can't look at them and say, that person looks like an abuser. There's nothing to say that. And it's important that we understand and appreciate
and the church must understand that. So if you see Pastor Adams comes in the pulpit and is dressed with his jacket and tie, and you just can't assume that he, God forbid, may not have a tendency to abuse. Abuse on your face, and it spawns, and we say, all being the religious, socioeconomic, ethnic, and in fact, the research literature gives us the data by ethnicity, in terms of profession, in terms of age, and all of that. It's not easy research. It's a lot of research, and that's why I said it would take us a whole year to talk to this matter, because you begin to unearth the research, and they show you by profession, the stats, by ethnicity, the stats. Yes, it shows you that clearly. And sad to say, clergy or people who are in the spiritual area, we are high up in terms of what the statistics is showing.
Definitely. You know, and the truth is, we also have to be sensitive to the fact that in today's world, where our children are exposed to all kinds of, unfortunately, all kinds of material. Because when you give a child a cell phone with data, you are putting in the child's hands everything, practically everything. You know, it's futile to say you can't watch television, but you can have a cell phone with data, because, you know, the internet. In fact, I remember traveling a year or two ago, coming back from a conference someplace, and I'm in the airport, and I am sitting down. There's some young children. My estimate is that they are between 6 and 8. and in the waiting, the departure area, there's a television, it's showing cartoons, and there were 3 or 4 children sitting down in just across from where the television was. And I thought to myself, this is interesting, because not one of them for a moment looked up at the cartoons on the television. None of them looked up at the cartoons, but they each had a cell phone in their hands. And that was occupying their attention. And I reverted back to, in my era, how we would be so captivated by what is showing on the television screen. But that is nothing to children now, because in the palm of their hands, they have exposure to pornography, to this, to violence, to this game, to that
Click
game.
over that.
And so you have a situation where a child may be corrupted and may think, because of what they see, what they experience, they may even begin to touch you and to expect you to do inappropriate things. You have to have the discipline to be mindful of
And
this.
while you mentioned the gadget, remember in the previous presentation, I was talking about the type of molesters, and the seductive abuser is one who uses social media to contact and to communicate with victims, because that's the in thing.
Yes.
But I was also going to say, Dr. McDonald, that Dr. His name, McDonald, I just want to quote his name correctly. Yes, I think it's the Dr. McDonald. He has an extensive work on sexuality. And what he's saying now, we are matching and I was coming back to the code of ethics in religious denominations, and why we have to think. Our children are coming to an age of sexual awareness because of the fact that we are living in the midst of a sexual tempest, a sexual holocaust. So our children, and what compounds that, is that they're coming to the age of puberance or sexual maturity, but still with the mind of a child. Well, that can be dangerous, because if we don't act with integrity, we can further exploit that situation, because you have some children in our ranks, in our midst, who are children in terms of their psychological age, their minds, but yet they show signs and evidence of physical maturity, puberance. And so the onset of puberance now was about between 13, 14 for girls, between 12, now it is earlier. In fact, they told me that shocked me. They said a child somewhere in, I think a child in Barbados, by age 9 was fully breasted, experiencing menstruation. That child can become pregnant. So in the midst of this sexual holocaust, this sexual tempest, our children are also coming to a stage of puberance, physical, sexual maturity, with the mind of a child.
So that, Pastor, if I'm speaking to caregivers now, those who are responsible for children, if you know that you have personal struggles, do yourself a favor, do the children a favor by declining to be in their care.
Declining,
right?
And not just decline, but go get professional help.
Correct. Yes.
Because I categorized the type of molesters, but I didn't finish dealing with all of them in our last presentation, right? And I said that some persons, one type of molesters is the person who still has the mind of a child as an adult and see children as their equal. Right? Because if you're going to be an adult, still have the mind of a child, right? That person has a fixation on children, adult, but still with the mind of a child, so they are my equal.
Now, I want to switch a little bit, because earlier I mentioned that child abuse is not just sexual abuse.
Right.
Right? Now, again, with respect to nurture and protection of children, there is something else that this statement addresses. And it says other practical measures that, of course, that the church needs to take, because notice that the statement says that we take seriously our responsibility. And I want to speak to those congregations that neglect to take seriously the responsibility. But hear what the statement says. other practical measures toward making church a safe place for children include attention to the safety of the church facility and its surroundings, and the careful supervision and monitoring of children and their environment during all church-related activities. Now, one aspect here is about the physical safety, right? The other is about proper supervision. So let's talk about physical safety for a moment. Clearly, we are saying as a church that you have a responsibility to make sure that your church is physically equipped.
Yes.
That it is a safe place, so that the furnishings, if you have playground material, the furniture, the building, etc.
Yes, so some adjustment has to be made sometime to the physical part. We're talking all of that as a whole. So you should have a place where the glass is made, the wall is not a solid wall, and a wooden door where nobody could see behind that wall or see what's happening inside there.
Correct.
The door should have, it has to be implemented. We said we talked to it, we have put it in policy document, but we have to do it. So if a church has a room where children go in and deal with under adult supervision and nobody could see in there, they have to correct that forthwith. The door has to be changed where half of the door is glass or porcelain, you could see inside there. That wall has to be readjusted.
But I'm coming back to that, Pastor.
Because safety.
Because that's safety for the children, you know. But I want to categorize that, although it's infrastructure, I want to categorize that in the supervision element. But now, a child is sitting in Sunday school or Sabbath school, and the furniture is not proper, and the child gets injured. That's a fault of the church.
Yes.
You know. So my question is, now you are not just Family Ministries Director. You're also you're in the context of our discussion today. You're also Ministerial Secretary.
Yes.
So ultimately, the pastor must see the element of the physical safety,
the physical safety, yes,
as a part of his or her administrative and management responsibilities.
Yeah.
So as a Ministerial Secretary, what is your counsel to pastors in this regard?
Go to the area where the children function and operate and take careful note of these things. As a pastor, I challenged my church, and they thought that it was an idle threat. I said, if we don't change this furnishing, we have all of this inside there, and all the adults are well seated, they are comfortable, but look where the children are. The children's furniture should be comfortable. Our girls, and all of that. I said, if we don't do this, I am going to have a problem scheduling myself to be at this church here. And I challenged them that we have to fix this.
So that
and they did. The pastor is the leader. You have to not just say that, but you have to show them the reasons why these things are important. You're not just, I just think that our people want leadership, and they want the leadership from the spiritual leader. You come to your leaders and you show them why this is important, why we have to do this. Do you know that? And sometimes our leadership are not even aware. That is why you have to educate and inform them, to let them know that this is not just doing this, but this is part of the whole process. This is part of the whole safety plan mechanism for our children. Because Jesus said that. Not only the sheep, take care of the lamb, and if they're not comfortable, and that's one of the reasons why we have that thing, because they see that they make the comparison, that these adults are so comfortable there, but you have locked us into any place, the furnishing not good, all kind of thing not in place, and you expect us to remain in this church?
Now, so a pastor who does not know what's going on in Sabbath school for the children, who is unconcerned about the ministry to the children in the Pathfinders and the Adventurous Club, who doesn't even know where the children's division is, then that is clearly a strike against the pastor.
Yes. Yes, you have to know that. And now that you said that, we talk about all the things of abuse. We talk about where they go, camps and so. As a pastor, my children are not going to any camp and I am not there. I remember camping, well, you know, I am originally from Guyana. We go on camp and I'm there, you know, rain and sun dry us back. I will not allow my young people. I have capable leaders, but during those times we didn't have these kind of policy statement and all these things written down. The pastor had to take, you know, now that we have it, you still, because we said these things doesn't wear a face, going back there, but coming back to the physical plant and the building and how these things, you have to take it on you. If you're not present there, if you have not gone there to see and to understand what that situation is, you will not be able to get your leadership of your church to take the appropriate action. When you see it and address it, you will know as a leader how to get the buy-in, because you will talk to them on what our policies is and how important it is and what the value of our children are to this organization, to this denomination. We all know that well. And so that is how you're able to motivate your leadership to treat with this. So because our children have, remember I said they don't have only emotional needs, they have spiritual needs, they have physical needs, all of this. So all has to be addressed.
Correct.
And physical need meaning where they assemble, how they sit, where they sit. You know, we have young ladies there, those leaders there. All of those are part of the grooming and nurturing of our children, how a girl should sit. You know, if the chair comfortable enough to have her sit in Sabbath school, teaching her to sit ladylike. The secular world is doing this. They have an etiquette class in how they are showing girls from this tender age how you sit as a lady.
You know, Pastor, it's interesting because, well, we don't have time to go into all the details, but there's one other element I just want to mention very quickly before we go to the supervisory aspect. And that is, you know, when you look at, if you do a survey among the churches, you kind of highlighted this in your response. The adults, the main sanctuary where the adults sit for their lesson discussion, their Sabbath school, etc., is well padded pews, air conditioned, etc., etc. The children are sometimes outside under a tree or in a corner, cramped for space.
Yes, with all kind of things packed up there.
That does something. It communicates a certain message that is wrong, which is why when a church is under construction and the plans come to the conference for approval, one of the things we look for is to ensure that the children are adequately provided for. And some adults will say, oh, they're going to grow up and so on, you know. But it is important that we let the children know that they're valuable. Last week, was it that you quoted the disciples saying to the parents who brought their children to Jesus, hey, listen, Jesus has no time for you. But Jesus said, no.
Rebuke them.
You know?
So let the children come to me.
Let the children come. Right. Elsewhere, Jesus said, listen, anyone who causes one of these little ones to stumble is better that a millstone will hang about his neck. Right?
And so those members who talk about that, if you have the children in that dilapidated on the bench and I come together, that's the form of physical abuse of our children and even psychological abuse, because they can compare. Children are not stupid, you know. Children are smart. They can make the comparison. Okay, you all say we are so, but give us the evidence that we are valuable.
Exactly. And we take a lot of things for granted.
Yeah, don't think that they're not aware.
So the investment in the nurture and the care of the child, it should never be secondary. It's primary.
That's primary.
Right.
There was something I wanted to say before we get to this, because we're talking about the environment, and well, I don't know if you're going to come back to it, but I didn't want to miss the train of thought, because in that process of education, and I alluded to that, I think, in our last thing, the church must have the educational class coping with parenthood, teaching children about sex. And they must be able to help them to recognize all forms and kinds of abuse. Because remember I said that the public, they have gone that way, because I remember when my children were nursery age, they were teaching them but sexual education at school, appropriateness
Well,
of
but
touch,
here's what I want to
how
say on
somebody is to
that.
touch, and so if they are doing that out there, then the church, why the church should be behind?
Well, let me just say this, because, there's a lot in the media, in the news media, depending on which country you live in.
Mm-hmm.
We do appreciate the fact that we have viewers from all around the world, and sex education in the public arena is, there's quite a stir there in terms of what we teach the children, what we don't
And what
teach
we
the
don't,
children.
yes.
So that the church must not leave the matter of sex education to the schools.
Right.
And when I say schools, I'm talking about
Because they
public schools.
yes, they go to the other, but I'm saying
Yeah.
the appropriate
So children
information.
should know about
Yes.
what is safe touch.
What is safe.
How do we, again, I'm saying, I really appreciate the Seventh Adventist Church and the kind of exposure that we give, because a child should know what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what do we allow versus what we should not allow. When do you say to your parents or to a responsible adult that, listen, this person makes me uncomfortable. These are things we ought not to take for granted.
And in our paper, in the policy says, I don't, because it was quite a lengthy thing, I remember, the child also must be educated on their right for protection. Because
But I'm going to come to that in a minute.
Because you ask, I think it was in the last broadcast, why some of these offenders who did not report.
Yes, I did.
The child has to know their right for protection, and if the child knows his or her right for protection, then they will report because they know their right to be protected as a child.
We're going to come to that in a minute,
Yes.
Pastor. But let me say this now. Supervision. So I'm going back to the supervision matter. Because sometimes I see parents in church and the child wants to use the restroom and the just say, go ahead. And the child runs off to the restroom. As a parent, you should be more responsible than that. You don't know what's in the restroom, who is in the restroom. You should, we're not taking away the responsibility of the church, and we have deacons and deaconesses, and we are supposed to be appropriately staffed to manage our facilities, and that's something that you may want to respond to. But parents themselves in church, I think last week, was it last week that you mentioned, this culture of niceness,
Yes.
we must not take for granted.
And the
fact.
on-site offender
Yes, correct.
versus the off-site offender. Now that you raised that, I just have to constrain myself of getting emotional because I know of a case in the Central Church in Georgetown where the deacon was an on-site offender.
We don't want to get too specific now. But here's the thing, Pastor.
Yes. Well, the case went to the thing, so it's not the case went to the point where the person. That's why I mentioned that the church didn't cover it. The offender was incarcerated and spent his time.
I'm gonna. How much time do we have? Because this is so significant.
Yes.
That I may want to jump to it right now, but no. Let me exercise discipline, because this matter of supervision. You mentioned, we said in our policy, a children's division teacher, you should not have a male. In fact, we spoke about not one person being in the care of children.
Right.
You need to have at least two adults, so that if there's an accusation, somebody else is there to say yes or no, as the case may be. These are very important things, but some of our congregations, find it difficult to implement.
Yes.
And you kind of wonder. But let's go to the matter of the education that you spoke about. We can't deal with everything, but here's what the statement says, this important element. Education regarding what constitutes appropriate and inappropriate interaction between adults and children. The warning signs of abuse and violence, you mentioned some of it last week, and the specific steps to be followed should inappropriate behavior be reported or suspected are vitally important.
Yes.
Now, you were saying just now that children need to know, and I'm going to use the word, need to be empowered to be able to say, this was wrong, this happened to me, right? We have situations where, unfortunately, a child reports, and let me say this, that leaders must understand that when there is an allegation of sexual abuse, this is not if or maybe or and, it has to be reported.
Yes.
And you have situations
You
where
are duty bound to report it, because law enforcement could say that you
are an accomplice.
Because
Yes.
this is a minor, whether it's a minor or not. If you do not report it within that, because when I said on the plant, these things happen there.
So what I want you to speak to is the issue where a parent reports it. And when we say report, we're not talking about telling the deacon or telling the elder. We're talking about reporting it to the authorities. A parent reports it to the authorities, and the church members ostracize this member, criticizes the member, says that the member is evil and wicked. You talked about this silence, conspiracy of silence. And what some people say is, we want to protect the good name of the church. Respond to that, Pastor.
Our members need to understand that this is the church of the living God. And when we started this conversation, I was careful to say that people come to the church with dysfunction, they come with pain and brokenness, and that has to be in the whole process of salvation. I was mindful to say that it, and I use the term soteria, which means healing, wellness. It is supposed to put us back in a state of wholeness. And I also was careful to mention that is not accomplished with let us pray alone. Because you can have members in the living church of God, Seventh Adventist, who are functioning and operating in a dysfunctional family setting. And in a dysfunctional family setting, all of those things happen. And so just as how the home is dysfunctional, the church can become dysfunctional if it doesn't deal with these things. You're going to create, because dysfunction begets dysfunction. That's what it is. And so therefore, and I want to put another word, you said the church is duty bound. The pastor and the leadership of the church, once this comes to the authority, and this is a known fact, the church, the pastor is duty bound to report this to law enforcement.
I wish to posit that when the church reports the matter, they're not hurting the abuser, they're helping the abuser.
Definitely.
And folks need to understand and appreciate this. And somebody may be asking,
and the community will appreciate this church, because this church is not condoning and covering it. This is the church that people want to come to, because compared to the others, where there's a conspiracy of signs, where we are sweeping things on the rug, we are covering things down, this is a church who deal with these things frontally. This is the church that people will want to come to.
Precisely.
That is where they're going to feel more safe. That this church has a policy, and it is rigid in its implementation, and it is not going to allow something spared because the person's a leader or in some position of authority. No, the church must function. Because remember I said what Christ said, anyone, and this it didn't categorize, whether it's your pastor or whether you're a rank and file member or whether you're a youth leader. It didn't say, it said anyone who offends these little ones. This is better than the milestones. It includes everybody.
Let me just give our viewers the concept here. A millstone was a huge stone that they used to grind wheat and the like. And so imagine this huge stone. I'm talking about huge. rounded stone so that you can push with your feet and it spins. So when you tie a stone like that, bigger than a human body sometimes, and you're cast into the sea, you know what's happening.
Yes, you cannot survive. You're going to sink.
Right? So that was very strong language. Very strong language.
Strong language.
That Jesus used there.
Because of the trauma. Because if that thing is not corrected, a child can grow up, become an adult, and go to his or her grave. I'm telling you that. Go to his or her grave. Because these girls were adults. Their father was in his advanced age, 70 plus going, when the case was reported.
Now, well, I tell you, Pastor, as a counselor myself, I know the pain because when you sit on the other side of the room and listen to individuals share their hurts, adults I'm talking about now, the struggles that they encountered because of the traumatic experiences they had as children when the abuse took place, how they felt trapped, how they struggled to form proper relationships when they grew up, how some of them determined that they were never going to trust a man, they were never going to get married. It's
the effects range from psychological, emotional, and now that you talk about when these people become adults and get into marriage, there's evidence of sexual dysfunction, there is disassociation, there is all kind of a sexual malfunctioning and it's a whole caseload of the person could become comorbid. But I'm saying that the person has several defects. So when you're treating them for this thing, and that's why we take a what we call in the clinical, but we take a bi-directional approach. So if the person comes to me and say, I was sexually abused, you have to look to see what else is there apart from this experience. Right. So you're talking about comorbidity.
So I want to say again, because sometimes one of the challenges that I have observed, we're speaking to the Christian church now, so I'm talking about across denominational, whether Catholic, Baptist, Pentecostal, Adventist, whatever. We do have a situation where there's what I consider to be a multiplicity of denominations. An individual is not in favor of what his or her pastor is doing, and they pull away with a group of members and they form a new church, and that church is called, I don't want to call a name because it may be a real name, there's so many these days, but that church is called whatever. And this person now assumes pastoral leadership of the church with no training, with no understanding of what is involved in family life dynamics and the issues that we're discussing this afternoon. And here a young lady comes to the pastor, because after all, he's the pastor, and she says, this is my situation. And he gives her inappropriate counsel. And that can add fuel to the fire.
Definitely. In fact, the pastor, and that's why that's dangerous, because even in organized religion, where the pastor is trained to be a pastor, but the pastor may not have the skill to deal with this particular issue.
Correct.
And therefore the pastor will know at that point in time that he or she has to refer that person to get the requisite type of clinical professional help that they would need.
So
because we are, let us, I'm repeating this again for another umpteenth time, let us pray. I mean, prayer is important, necessary, but let us pray alone cannot solve these issues. And I want our membership to hear this.
I think they've heard it now. It's important. I know some folks are struggling with it, but it's a reality. There are some individuals who are so messed up, who have been so traumatized that you need a certain level. You know, if you get your foot broken playing football, prayer is important, but prayer alone is not going to mend the foot. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, you know, in that case, you need a medical doctor.
Yes.
You need somebody who's going to be able to mend that foot. But you have to see psychological damage in the same way, in the same light, because some individuals are struggling with these kind of challenges that require intervention. And counselors need to know when this is beyond their aid. You know, I remember when I had my first suicide case, you know, when a member came to me and said, listen, reported that this particular individual left a note to say that they're going to kill themselves. Now, fortunately, I belong to a volunteer organization where we were doing intervention at various levels, and the leader of that, I was a young pastor then, the leader of that group was a trained interventionist, psychologist, etc. And I said, hey, listen, I have this situation. And you know, he quickly said, great, you know, I'm going to need your help on times too, because I have some cases where people need spiritual advice and counseling, and we worked on the case together. But I found it necessary at that time to refer, in spite of the academic training, because academic training is one thing, you know, but when you have a practical situation and you are inexperienced,
and you did the right thing because you're acting as a mature spiritual leader.
Yes.
That does not diminish you or in the eyes of your member.
Exactly.
To say that I don't have this competency and I'm referring you. That's it, because we have several gifts. And you may not have in fact, the pastoring gifts is the pastor who are teachers, but the gift of help, under which counseling comes, and now we have the clinical professional, that's a different gift altogether. So that does not diminish you in any way. And I don't know, sometimes some clergymen might feel that, okay, I somehow I'm going to disappoint my member, I'm somehow going to feel depreciated or something like that. No.
I mean,
you're acting professionally and responsible.
If in a hospital situation, a doctor who is, let's say, an ear and nose specialist, and somebody goes with a hernia and he decides, I'm going to operate on this person, he could get himself in a lot of trouble.
A lot of trouble, and that's
because
why
he's acting outside of his area of expertise. And likewise, we must know when this particular case needs referral.
Yes.
But finally, Pastor, I think we probably have maybe 3-4 minutes. I want to, you know, we have to wrap it up today. So, one final thing I want to say from this statement: the church's commitment to breaking, I'm talking to advocacy now, the church's statement to breaking the silence frequently associated with child sexual abuse and violence, its efforts toward advocacy and justice for all victims, and deliberate action to safeguard children from all forms of abuse and violence will contribute much toward the emotional and spiritual recovery of the concerned. The church regards the nurture and protection of children as a sacred trust. I'm talking about advocacy. So as a church, we have to advocate. We have to, the education that we are doing right here today is a part of that process.
Advocacy, yes.
But advocacy is important. So we have to speak out against the abuse. We have to inform our members and speak to this from the pulpit, so that the message comes across. Because this is perhaps the only time you get everybody's attention.
Well, remember I said in the last one that some of these victims left the church. But if the church was a church that spoke to this thing, joined the advocacy program, and tend to the spiritual recovery of the person, we still could have redeemed those persons. The church can still redeem those people because they would have seen that we are strong on our advocacy, that we are against this thing, and that we are using this position of authority, because the pulpit is a position of authority. We are using there to talk to this matter so that we are able to restore, because I said that in our first installment, that when we talk to family ministries, we are talking also not just to the ideal, but we are talking also to the pain and dysfunction and the brokenness of our people.
Correct.
And it is in that faith community that people should be restored, because there's need for healing and forgiveness and restoration. It's the whole process. And so if people see that the church is into all this advocacy plus all of this, we still will save them, or still can save them.
You know, Pastor, we are out of time. The discussion was so intense, you know, that the questions and comments that our viewers have shared, we some of it we have covered with some of the things, but the others, so perhaps another time we will just sit down and look at issues relating to the questions and concerns that our viewers have. I want to thank you for the contribution that you have made to this very important subject. The church must never be a cloak for the practice of evil, the practice of unfaithfulness, the practice of hurting others, of abuse, you know. And so we all have an important role to play in making our churches safe for our children, for our adults, for everybody. Members of our society must know that, and I want to say this, that every Seventh-day Adventist church must be a community church, a place where, what did Jesus say? My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people.
For all people.
So people must know that they can come and find refuge and solace. And that's what it's all about. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing. And we encourage you to keep listening to Let's Talk. May God bless you.